Hi, friends. Today we inaugurate the first session of our CME on various topics, right from medico-legal aspects of medicine to COVID times, and we'll have people coming and talking on that topic, and each one of them is a specialist in that field. We at Dr. Das Hospital have been functioning regularly since the lockdown. Initially, we closed down the ICCU to build an isolation ward so that people who came in breathless could take facility of the hospital without endangering other people's lives. And this we did by creating a isolation ward. Our OTs, we vamped up the AHU from 25 cycles an hour, we made it 40 cycles. We bought a smoke evacuator. We got in a anesthetic gas evacuation system. And hence we gradually made it into a non-COVID hospital where we would get in patients, screen them, and then take them for any procedure. So for surgery, elective, we had certain protocol of having the RT-PCR done, if required, even a chest X-ray done. What did we do in emergencies? In emergencies, what we did was we did a antigen test, rapid antigen test, or the RAT test, and if we got positive, we didn't take up the patient. And we had a screening room where we screened all patients for emergencies. Because if a patient came breathless, we didn't know whether it is a congestive cardiac failure, left ventricular failure, or whether it is a COVID. This is how we went about. Until now, we have been successful, not as much successful as the COVID people by having 100% occupancy. We don't have 100% occupancy. We have only about 10 to 20% occupancy. But the good thing is we have been able to look after the non-COVID illness in patients. And our staff has been fully paid, 50 staff, no cut in salary. They've even got the bonus and enjoyed a Diwali lunch. So in short, we have run a regular service. We have a day and night patho lab. We have a day and night medical stores which are sourced out to somebody else. Our lab is in collaboration with Dr. Rishi Mehta. And we have run this place as a total non-COVID hospital. So this is how we went about managing this place. And today we can proudly say, after so many days, that we are happy to serve the community in Chembur and around Chembur with total non-COVID activity. Yes, we do get COVID patients, but then we ship them out from the isolation area. On our 6th floor, no patient is taken without the checkups. And then in the 2nd floor, we have an area for isolation. So we'll go back to our topic of today. And as I promised you, we have people who are specialists in that field. Dr. Shashank Nagendra is a Chemburite who has done his DM in neurology, and he specializes in stroke management. And he is an expert on stroke management. And during this COVID times, we have seen a lot of cases of stroke, primarily because these are people who have been through COVID or some form of disease related to COVID and then developed clots. That is what our belief is and our findings are. Shashank has done his MBBS from Meerut. Then he has done his MD from my college, that is Grand Medical College. And then he has done his DM from there. He has been trained extensively in the management of stroke, and he has joined our polyclinic and is very helpful to our patients by giving them care in the form of good neurological support. I now take you over to Dr. Shashank Nagendra, who will speak to you about strokes. Shashank, please take over.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Thank you. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Das for giving me the opportunity to speak regarding this topic. I would like to thank you all. Uh, Actually, this is a sort of a dinner time for everyone. So I hope I'm not boring, and I hope to be interesting enough to hold your attention till the end. So just sharing my screen. Yeah, is my screen visible? Das sir, is my screen visible?
Yes.
It is visible.
Yeah.
For those who cannot hear, I think you have to unmute yourself. At the bottom of the screen, there is a place you can unmute and you can hear. I mean, talk. But to hear, you to have a good connection. There are some inquiries regarding that they cannot hear. Shashank, please continue.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So today I would like to talk about stroke in general, what we see regularly with regards to the clinical presentations and what it means to treat these patients and how to go about treating them. So I'm available at Das Hospital for 3 days, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday from 5 to 7 p.m. So let me start off with this almost a big warning from the WHO, which was a theme for the World Stroke Day last year. It says that 1 in 4 of us will have a stroke during our lifetime. So that is quite a big number if you go to see. So we have to try to achieve to not be the one and help those around us for to prevent this kind of catastrophe. So just a brief introduction on stroke. Approximately 1 in every 40 seconds, a person has a stroke. There are around 8 lakh people who have a stroke each year, and it is the second leading cause of death in the world. So what is a stroke? It occurs due to problems with blood supply to the brain. So the blood supply may be blocked or a blood vessel within the brain ruptures, causing the brain tissue to die or infarct. It is a medical emergency and treatment should be sought as quickly as possible. Coming to the definition, it is any acute neurological deficit which is any sudden neurological deficit, and it may be lasting for more than 24 hours, and it has no apparent other cause apart from a vascular one. It occurs because of rapid loss of brain function due to a disturbance in the blood supply. So this is an image. Here it shows that there may be a blood clot in one of the vessels which supplies blood to the brain, which causes less amount of blood to reach that part of the brain, resulting in some permanent neurological dysfunction, and that may manifest as weakness or some other symptoms which we will come to in the subsequent slides. So these clots can come from anywhere. They may form because of a atherosclerotic plaque within the vessels, or they may come directly from the heart. So just a brief epidemiology. Third most common cause of death after cancer and ischemic heart disease. It's more known to cause severe physical disability. In India, 1.5 per 1,000 is the prevalence, and 0.6 patients per 1,000 die. Obviously, the adoption of unhealthy lifestyle, burgers, pizzas, excess cheese, all these contributes to cardiovascular diseases as well as stroke. The same risk factors apply to both. Now, the national burden within India, around the recent literature say that around 200 people per 1 lakh in rural and up to 400 in the urban areas may have stroke. The incidence is 89 per 1 lakh in 2005, and it is almost 100. It is estimated that it would almost touch 100 per 1 lakh in 2030. It is accounted for 0.9 to 4.5% of total medical admissions and 9.2 to 30% of admission to neurological wards. Now, after taking on the epidemiology, we will see what are the three main kinds of stroke? The strokes can be basically classified as ischemic strokes, which is because of decreased blood supply to the brain, hemorrhagic strokes, where there may be a rupture of a blood vessels in the brain, and the mini strokes. This is the most important kind of stroke, that is the transient ischemic attacks. I'll come back later as to why I refer to them as the most important kind. Just a brief visual demonstration of how a plaque in the blood vessel may lead to an area of less blood supply. This is what manifests as an ischemic stroke, while if there may be a rupture in the blood vessel, the same area tends to hemorrhage and there is a leak of blood. This causes a hemorrhagic stroke. Now, basically, the vessels in the brain, there are four primary vessels. Two in the anterior circulation, that is the carotid arteries, which then bifurcate into the internal carotid and the external carotid arteries. The internal carotid arteries mainly going on to supply the brain, while the posterior circulation is comprised of vertebral arteries, which join up to form the basilar artery, and then they may supply the posterior part of the brain. Coming to ischemic stroke, it accounts for 85% of all strokes. Although we may see that hemorrhagic strokes uh, may be more serious, the patients there may have a poorer outcome, they are more visible in day-to-day life, but we should remember that the most common kind of stroke is still ischemic stroke. They account for roughly 85% of all strokes. And the causes are, as described previously, blockages and narrowing, resulting in severe ischemia of the blood and probably converting into an infarct. So why do these clots form? These clots are formed because of atherosclerotic plaques which form on the arteries. It is basically a denuded endothelium which then causes the accumulation of lipid deposits, and that may lead to vessel narrowing, further stenosis, and it may ultimately lead to vessel occlusion, which causes the decreased blood supply and clots and ischemia. With regards to hemorrhagic stroke, obviously the presentations may be more catastrophic. Here it is because the arteries in the brain may leak or burst open. They may be because of various causes: hypertension, trauma, patient being on anticoagulants, especially that we are seeing nowadays, as many patients post-COVID are on medications, that is blood thinners, as we call them, and that may cause bleeding inside the brain. Then we also have aneurysms, which are the major cause of the particular kind of hemorrhage called as subarachnoid hemorrhage, and that need to be picked up early because they need to be treated. Otherwise, they may rebleed, may be very severe for the patient. So, just a brief description of subarachnoid hemorrhage. The bleeding occurs in the subarachnoid space. That is, it's the area between the covering or the meninges of the brain. So that can be detected on a plain CT. And once that is done, we need to search extensively for an aneurysm because we need to prevent a rebleed. Now, coming to what I think is the most important kind of ischemic stroke, or the category of ischemic stroke, that is transient ischemic attacks. The reason why I call them important is because the manifestations are very subtle. If they are not picked up, the next time the patient presents to you, he may present, or he or she may present with a big stroke. So these are effectively warning signs which we as doctors need to pick up and put them on proper treatment so as to prevent them into transforming into a major stroke. So what is a TIA, or a transient ischemic attack? A TIA is a kind of a mini stroke which occurs because the blood flow is paused to the blood flow to the brain is paused, but only temporarily. So there may be what happens is the blood flow then reverses, and because of that, the neurological manifestations may resolve. So sometimes, most of the times, the patient themselves are not aware, or they may be aware, but then they may be missed as usually the symptoms which they say is, I have not eaten, so probably that's why I'm feeling a bit weak. But we need to pick those up. As mentioned, they should be regarded as medical emergencies. They serve as warning signs for future strokes. Over a third of the people who suffer a transient ischemic attack go on to have a major stroke within the next year. So this is the category of people which can be completely salvaged by instituting proper medical therapy. Similar to stroke, what could be the causes of TIA? If you see from proximal to distal, that is the most proximal site is the heart, where you would have left ventricular thrombi, you may have atrial fibrillation, which is leading to clots, you may have wall disease. Then there may be plaques in the arch of aorta, which may rupture and go up. Then again, more distal, the carotid, which is very common. We see carotid plaques which are causing embolus, and then that causes strokes. Then there may be severely flow reducing carotid stenosis, which lead to something called as a watershed infarct, where blood is not reaching a part of the brain which is in between the arterial supply of two territories. Then there may be more distal kind of penetrating artery disease, intracranial atherosclerosis, which may lead to the strokes. Even after all this, up to 40% of or to 50% of strokes may not have a reason. So that we term as cryptogenic stroke, although with effective diagnosis and
मी पण पैसे देणार नाही मी मदत तुम्ही मदत करणार आम्हाला सांगू नका तुम्ही पैसे देणार नाही ते आम्हाला क्लिअर झालं
sorry. So there may be other causes of cryptogenic stroke. Right now, the percentage which was previously classified as cryptogenic is obviously now decreasing because of the multitude of tests available where we can detect the cause of the stroke, especially with the 24 to 48 hour Holters. We are picking up transient atrial fibrillations, which can then be properly treated to prevent the recurrent strokes. So what are the signs of strokes? The obvious signs are weakness on one side of the body. It may be numbness. There may be trouble speaking. There may be vision problems where patient may suddenly have difficulty in seeing in one eye, which is termed as clinically as amaurosis fugax. There may be severe headache, which may be a sign of subarachnoid hemorrhage, and dizziness. So dizziness can occur with other scenarios also as well, but in combination with other signs and symptoms, dizziness should be taken seriously, as it may be one of the signs of stroke. So the main apart from that, there may be confusion, trouble with speaking, numbness, as we described, trouble speaking, seeing with one or both eyes, and trouble with walking, and lack of coordination. So a useful acronym to remember the symptoms of stroke is FAST, where F stands for face looking uneven. You can ask the patient to smile. Then we have an arm weakness. You ask the patient to raise both arms at the same time to see if there is a drift in one hand. You check for the speech, see if the speech is slurred, or if the patient is not able to communicate properly or understand, where it may signify a language problem, which also may be a symptom of stroke as an aphasia. And time is of essence, because we need to act fast whenever there are any of these symptoms of stroke. We need to call 108. So simple thing, you can ask a person to smile, stick out a tongue, ask them to complete a sentence, which will help in language evaluation, as well as it will help us to identify if there's any slurring. The relatives may help because they are the first ones to notice a change in the language, as we may be seeing the patient for the first time. Ask the patient to raise both arms, and we need to institute therapy as soon as one of these symptoms are found. So there is a revision of the acronym, and the latest revision is now we need to consider it as BFAST, where BE is for B for balance and I for blurred vision, where there is less vision in one eye. So any of these symptoms, and then the FAST stands for face, arm, speech, and time. So again, we need to understand all of this to take fast action for a stroke patient. So next we come in the management of stroke. The most important aspect, I would say, is the imaging. As of now, all the treatment which has been instituted is stroke is basically a clinical diagnosis, but once it is done, the therapy can only be instituted once we have appropriate imaging. Although simple imaging will help us to take rapid decisions, a few more additions to that imaging will help us to classify patients regarding who needs an intravenous therapy and who needs a mechanical thrombectomy. So I'll be coming to that later on. But a useful mnemonic, we could say, is the 4 P's towards which our assessment should be directed while we are performing the imaging. P for parenchyma, that is the brain parenchyma. Then the P for pipes, that is the blood vessels. There are of course the pipes which supply blood to the brain. Then we need to see the perfusion, that is which areas are perfused, which are not, and the penumbra, which I'll be discussing in the next slide. So the most important part of stroke is to understand what is the core and what is meant by the penumbra. So in the simplest possible terms, core is the area which is already infarcted. Penumbra is the area which is not yet infarcted, but can be if proper treatment is not administered. So as doctors, we need to take care of the penumbra and salvage as much as possible. The ischemic core, although it may not be treated, when the patient presents, we actually do not come to know how much is the ischemic core. So the recent studies say that we should consider as much as possible as the penumbra, and we should try to salvage as much of the brain as possible. The easiest and the simplest test available is a non-contrast CT scan. So it is the first line diagnostic step. CT scans are usually ubiquitous, and it is usually rapidly done. Now, the role in stroke, first and foremost in CT, is to exclude an hemorrhage, because hemorrhage becomes a contraindication to institute any form of thrombolytic agent. So if there is an hemorrhage, if there's a hemorrhage, then we go about to see why that hemorrhage has occurred. Probably you get an angio to see if there's an aneurysm, but you don't institute aspirin, you don't institute any antiplatelet, antithrombotic, or a fibrinolytic agent. So that is the first and foremost the use of a plain CT scan. It also sometimes helps to rule out stroke mimics like an infection, a tumor. Sometimes it may give you an idea of a location, although if patient is brought within the window period of 4.5 hours, most of the CT scans come out to be normal. Few things which can be picked up on a plain CT. The first one is what is called as the hyperdense MCA sign. So as we can see, the arrow shows hyperdensity in the CT. So that is basically a thrombus sitting in the middle cerebral artery. So this can easily help us to identify that the patient is going to have a large stroke, since that is a large vessel occlusion, and probably this patient will require a mechanical thrombectomy. Secondly, we can this is another plain CT which is showing this. The area is the insula, the Sylvian fissure, basically, where there is a hyperdensity. So this is an MCA dot sign, and as you can see in the right hand figure, there's an arrow which is pointing towards the location of the clot. So these were for the anterior circulation. The posterior circulation obviously involves the vertebral and the basilar artery. The basilar artery is one of the main arteries because it supplies blood to the entirety of the posterior circulation. Any blockage of the basilar artery may result in a massive infarction, and the patient is as good as gone. So we need to act fast in posterior circulation strokes, and a sign such as this may help us to pick up a basilar artery occlusion. So we can see in the left hand image, there is a basilar dot sign or a hyperdense basilar sign, and the thrombus is visible on a angiography, CT angiography on the right hand side. You can see that there is a non-visualized, there is no contrast opacification of the occluded segment. Subtle signs which help us to identify early strokes on a plain CT, that is the obscuration of the lentiform nucleus, which is an important sign of early infarction. So the arrowheads show the the lentiform nucleus, and it is not clearly visible. If you go to see, the right hand side is the normal side, left hand side is the infarcted side, which is shown by the arrowheads. That there's no clear visibility of the lentiform nucleus. So it signifies a middle cerebral artery infarction, MCA territory infarction. Next, we come up with the insular ribbon sign, which basically is a hypodensity and swelling of the insular cortex. So insular cortex is demonstrated by the black arrows, and this region is very sensitive to ischemia because it doesn't have good collateral flow, that is flow from elsewhere in the brain. Commonly, we encounter patients who are having infarcts, but along with infarcts, there may be hemorrhage within the infarct. So this is called as hemorrhagic transformation. So whenever we see an infarct with a hemorrhage or hemorrhagic transformation, we need to rule out venous etiology of strokes. That is, whether the patient is having a CVST, cerebral venous sinus thrombosis. Obviously, the clinical presentations may be slightly different. Along with a focal neurological deficit, the patient of CVST tends to have headache, seizures, altered sensorium. So, in the imaging, this may guide us regarding the etiology of the stroke. That there may be areas of infarction with an hemorrhage. Even an arterial infarction may have an hemorrhagic transformation, especially the ones which are embolic. So we need to be careful about doing a 2D echo for these patients, because we need to pick up the emboli or see the ECG for any evidence of atrial fibrillation. So the Calgary group has come up with a very useful score called as the Aspect score. This is a scoring system which is used in acute stroke. It is a scoring system on 10 of 10, where a lower score is suggestive of a worse prognosis and a higher score is suggestive of a good prognosis. So basically, at the ganglionic level, you have M1, M2, M3, and at the cortical level, you have M4, M5, M6. Each accounts for 1 point, and 4 points are with regards to the caudate nucleus, with regards that stands for C, the L for the lentiform nucleus, IC for the internal capsule, and there is a I which stands for the insula. So each of these is given 1 point, which accounts for a total of 10 points, and you need to minus 1 point for every area which appears hypodense. So if there is a large stroke, so you would cut off more number of points, and you would land up with a figure between 3 to 6, which usually signifies a very big stroke. 8 to 10 is you are dealing with a minor stroke. So we have just covered the tip of the imaging. That is the usual thing which is used, which is CT, which is easily available. So even with a plain CT, much of it can be understood. Obviously, it is better to add to it an angiography, a CT angiography, because that will also give us the idea of the pipes. If there is a thrombus somewhere, if there is an occlusion, we can find that out on a CT angiogram. Nowadays, what is seen is when we are doing a CT angiogram, they ask for a creatinine level to see if there is no renal dysfunction. But in an emergency, it's difficult to obtain an RFT within the window period. So at such times, the brain is always over the kidney. You need to act fast. You don't require a RFT. You can straight away go in with a CT angiography. Coming to the next modality, especially in centers where they are able to achieve rapid, as you say, door to needle times. There they have MRI scanners which are available at all times. You need to do 2-3 sequences on an MRI to pick up early strokes. The most important being diffusion MRI. So it is uniquely sensitive to detect earliest changes within 90 minutes. It is almost 90% sensitivity and specificity. So what we see are basically 2 sequences, that is the diffusion and the ADC. The diffusion sequence shows a hyperintense signal, while the corresponding areas on ADC should show a low signal. So that shows a fresh infarct. Chronic infarcts may be are hypodense on DWI and hyperintense on ADC. So what is the use of DWI on conventional imaging? So it helps to identify stroke fast. it helps to differentiate between acute and chronic infarcts. That is what, because many times we see patients may have more than one stroke. They may come with repeated strokes. So that time we need to find out which is the fresh stroke and which is the old stroke. Then we may also have small lesions which are adjacent to the CSF diagnosed by FLAIR. Fresh lesion can be identified among multiple infarcts, and it helps to predict outcome and to facilitate correlation with final infarct size. So this is just a brief graph where the usual sequence, that is the T2 sequence, is not really helpful in stroke because it may show a hyperintense signal, which apart from that, it may show a signal in many conditions. So it may not really be useful. What is really useful is the DWI and the ADC. So the over time, the DWI signal becomes more intense over 2 to 3 weeks, after which the intensity goes on to fall. At the same time, the ADC is hypointense at the beginning, and then it goes on decreasing, the intensity keeps on decreasing, and then after that, it may become hyperintense in the later stage, which may signify a chronic infarct. So we need to see basically the DWI and the ADC, white on DWI, black on ADC. That will help us to identify fresh strokes. Most important, whether be it CT angiography or an MRI angiography, is the whether CT or MRI is the angiogram. The angiogram will exactly help us to localize the area of occlusion, the clot size, and help us, it guides therapeutics. Obviously, the main difference between a CT angiogram and an MRI angiogram is the MRI angiogram avoids contrast. It is a time of flare image. So it is especially helpful in known CKD patients where doing a CT angiography may be harmful for the kidneys. So these are just few angiographic images. In the left image, we can see that the right middle cerebral artery shown by the white arrowheads is not visible at all. The same thing is seen on a coronal image on the right side. The other modalities which are used in stroke is a carotid ultrasound. Especially, this is done via a sonography machine, and it sees the carotid arteries are basically seen to see if there's any plaque present. The gold standard test is a 4-vessel DSA or a cerebral angiogram. It is basically dyes which are injected into the brain, which makes them visible under X-ray or fluoroscopy, and it gives a detailed review of the brain and neck arteries. DSA is not required routinely. However, if we are taking up patients for mechanical thrombectomy, we do need to do a DSA beforehand to see which vessel is occluded, because that can later on be converted to and guided towards therapeutics where we may need a stent retriever. The echocardiogram gives a detailed image of the heart to see whether clots are rising from the heart. In the emergency period or the window period, what we need to remember is the only blood test that really matters is the blood sugar. This is because a low blood sugar or hypoglycemia may manifest with any kind of neurological symptom, which may be mistaken for a stroke. So the only real blood test which we need to do is a blood sugar. That also can be managed with a HGT machine. On the spot, you can take the blood sugar, and if it's low, we can correct it. Now, coming to the treatment part of stroke. So as we have discussed, the treatment of acute stroke, that is the stroke within the window period, it depends on two things. First, what we see in our scenario is that the relatives need to understand that the patient has suffered a stroke. Many times they themselves don't understand. Many times the patient himself cannot say, and because of that, there is wastage of valuable time, and the patient arrives to the hospital late. We need to make sure that there is enough education and awareness among the patients so that they recognize that when there is a stroke, and they can be brought to the hospital. So the treatment of stroke starts off in the pre-hospital period, where we need to educate patients and also make the patients aware of the centers which are treating stroke. Because even if you have a stroke, the patient should know where he should go so that he can get timely therapy. Because not all hospitals may not be as we call as stroke ready. So we need to take to a regional center. So in stroke lingo, they are termed as the primary stroke center and a comprehensive stroke center. A primary stroke center is a center which is able to rapidly diagnose stroke, rapidly diagnose the type of occlusion, and it would be rapidly able to institute intravenous thrombolysis. While a comprehensive stroke center would have all these facilities plus access to a cath lab where mechanical thrombectomy can be done. And stroke is a team game. It is not possible by one person. We need to have a team of nurses, doctors available 24/7 so that they are able to attend patients whenever they come in and make decisions rapidly. So an organized protocol for emergency evaluation is recommended. So the window treatment for stroke here being 4.5 hours for IV thrombolysis, and that can be extended up to 24 hours when you are suspecting a large vessel occlusion and we need to go in for mechanical thrombectomy. But the golden period is the first 4.5 hours. And what it means is the earlier the better. That is, earlier the patient is treated, the better the outcome is. Just because the window period is 4.5 hours doesn't mean that we wait. Every minute may lead to a loss of 2 million neurons. So we need to be very careful and institute therapy as quickly as possible. Right now, there is an age of WhatsApp, telemedicine, teleradiology. So definitely there are programs coming up where evaluation of an acute ischemic stroke can be effective, and on the phone, patients can be guided regarding intravenous alteplase. Then we also need to establish, each center needs to establish goals regarding the door to needle time or the door to IV fibrinolysis time. And we need to get this time as close to zero as possible. Obviously, it will never be zero, but we need to act to reduce the time as much as possible. And we need to have reviews regarding the number of patients thrombolyzed and what is the time taking so that we can improve on that and identify potential delays. With regard to the emergency evaluation, the treating physician should, the usually used stroke scale is the NIHSS or the National Institute of Health stroke scale. So this is a scale of 42 where various aspects of stroke are evaluated with regards to hand weakness, leg weakness, speech weakness, face weakness, whether there's any ataxia. So there are 42 points. So that helps us to identify the severity of stroke. So stroke below 6 may be a very minor stroke, while a stroke below 12 or 14 is a very major stroke, and that needs to be treated as quickly as possible. Now coming to that 4.5 window period for IV alteplase. As we discussed earlier, a non-contrast CT is sufficient to exclude intracranial hemorrhage before IV alteplase. Ideally, I would like that we accompany that with a imaging of the vessels, that is an angiography. But if that is not possible, a plain CT is enough to give IV alteplase. MRI is not required. CT angio will obviously help in making decisions, especially those patients which need to be shifted to the cath lab for mechanical thrombectomy. If there is a DWI images with an MRI, where a MRI center is readily available, that obviously is better if they are able to achieve good timings with regards to the door to needle time, especially in patients who wake up with stroke. So when patients wake up with stroke, we are not really aware of the onset of stroke. So the 4.5 window period cannot be defined. In such times, we take up what we known as LKWT, that is the last known well time, and that time is taken as the time of onset. And if they are coming out of the window period, there are some things. There may be images like a diffusion flare mismatch, which may help to guide therapy. Now coming to the mechanical thrombectomy, that is what is the imaging required for mechanical thrombectomy. So the intracranial vessel imaging is required as quickly as possible because it is impossible to detect whether the vessel occluded is a large one or no. There may be an imaging of the extracranial carotid and vertebral arteries. 6 hours is the window period for mechanical thrombectomy, but in selected patients, the window period can be extended to 24 hours and beyond as well. There are other images, or what we say, the bigger centers have access to better imaging facilities, that is CT angiography with CT perfusion or a MRI perfusion imaging, which may not really be required in an acute setting. It helps to make decisions regarding those patients who are out of the window period, but it is time consuming. So we may be losing valuable time in treating the patient while doing this extra imaging. So we need to try to develop a protocol within our hospitals where the imaging is as simple as possible, and the doctor who is attending the patient should be able to interpret the imaging and institute treatment rapidly. As we discussed earlier, serum creatinine is not required if there is no previous history of renal impairment. Blood glucose is the only required test. ECG, troponin, X-ray is not required. I mean, it is recommended. You can do it later on, but it is not required because it may take up valuable time. So benefit of IV alteplase is when it is initiated as quickly as possible. We should not delay IV alteplase to see if the patient is improving. The only thing which we need to monitor is the BP. The blood pressure should be below 185 by 110. If it is not, we need to reduce the BP below that, so that there is no hemorrhage after instituting alteplase. Again, as we discussed, the blood glucose, hypoglycemia can manifest anyhow. We need to correct the sugars before we diagnose a stroke. Now, first of all, we'll come to the contraindications of alteplase. So alteplase should be given in any case of ischemic stroke which is presenting within the 4.5 hour window period. The contraindications to alteplase, or when we should not lyse the patient: if there is severe head trauma within the previous 3 months, there is symptoms suggestive of subarachnoid hemorrhage or any previous intracranial hemorrhage, if there is intracranial or a spinal surgery in the previous 3 months, there is a documented neoplasm, there's infective endocarditis or an aortic arch dissection. If the BP is above 185 by 110, we should reduce the BP and then give alteplase. If there is an active internal bleeding, platelet counts less than 1 lakh, or heparin received within 48 hours. So again, with heparin, what we do is you measure an APTT and an INR. So especially INR is required when we are giving warfarin, and APTT, heparin, we monitor the APTT. So above 40 seconds APTT, if the patient is heparinized, it is risky to give alteplase as it may lead to hemorrhage. While if an INR of 1.7 and above may be risky to when we are instituting alteplase. Below 1.7, even if the patient is with warfarin, we can safely give alteplase. So direct thrombin inhibitors or direct factor 10A inhibitors. So these are the newer molecules which are coming, commonly used now, especially in COVID times. The drugs such as Pradaxa, that is dabigatran, apixaban. So right now we have antibodies for both, that is dabigatran, that is itracizumab, and Andexxa for apixaban. So both can be reversed when we are giving, when we want to institute alteplase. So if the CT demonstrates an infarction more than 1/3 of the cerebral hemisphere, then it may be a large infarct, and when you give alteplase, there is a tendency to bleed with such infarcts. And obviously, if there's an acute intracranial hemorrhage, we cannot give alteplase. So next, coming to relative contraindications, but most of these patients can be given alteplase after correcting those factors, or just seeing that they are not too severe. If there's a rapidly improving stroke patient, I mean, the NIH come down drastically from 12 to 4, then you can observe the patient, no need to give alteplase. Then there is a severe neurological deficit that is about 25 into 3 to 4.5 hour window period. That is signifying a major stroke. Pregnancy. Now again, pregnancy, if the benefit is more than the risk, if the patient is suffering a large infarct, then we can still give IV alteplase. Obviously, with the advent of mechanical thrombectomy, again, that becomes very safe. If there is a seizure at the onset, because we need to make sure that it is a stroke only. If there's an arterial puncture at a non-compressible site, but again, we need to, in all these areas, we need to assess the benefits as compared to the risk. If there is an untreated AV malformation or a giant intracranial aneurysm, if there's a history of major surgery, or serious trauma within the past 14 days. So only 2 weeks. Before that, if it's okay, we go ahead and lyse. If there is recent gastrointestinal or urinary tract hemorrhage, if there is an ischemic stroke within the previous 3 months, if there's a recent MI within the previous 3 months. Although, even if there is an MI, we need to assess the benefits, discuss with the cardiologist, and then go ahead and lyse. And again, blood sugar we need to monitor. So apart from alteplase, the Drug Controller General of India, the DCGI, has given approval for tenecteplase. It is usually given at a dose of 0.25 milligram per kg. The advantage of tenecteplase is that it is a bolus dose. That is, alteplase is given at the dose of 0.9 milligram per kg, and it is given as a bolus, where 10% is given as a bolus and a 90% is given over a period of 1 hour. With regards to that, tenecteplase is given only as a bolus. That is 0.25 milligram per kg, one single shot. So that is the advantage of tenecteplase. But in India, it is approved only for the 0 to 3 hour window period. That is the problem. If the patient is coming within 3 hours, definitely we can lyse with tenecteplase. So only these two are the only drugs which are as of now approved for acute ischemic stroke. That is tenecteplase and alteplase. Alteplase at 0.9 milligram per kg and tenecteplase as 0.25 milligram per kg. Now coming to the recent aspects, that is right now there is an overwhelming body of evidence for mechanical thrombectomy with the number needed to treat as low as 3. So along with IV alteplase, we need to identify those patients who will benefit with mechanical thrombectomy. So what happens is, if there is a large vessel occlusion. So what do we mean by a large vessel occlusion? That is an occlusion of the internal carotid artery or an occlusion of the middle cerebral artery. So, and obviously the basilar artery. So these are the large vessel occlusions, the large vessels, and their occlusion may mean that IV alteplase may not work, because the drug may not be able to penetrate or cross that barrier. So we need to be aware of such situations, and in such situation, as per current guidelines, we need to combine IV alteplase with mechanical thrombectomy. That they should receive IV alteplase and then be shifted to a center which has a cath lab and which can where the patient can be taken up as quickly as possible for a mechanical thrombectomy. The important point to note here is, once we give IV alteplase, and if there is a documented large vessel occlusion, we should not observe the patient to assess clinical response. The patient should be shifted as fast as possible, and if there is the facilities to a cath lab is there in the same hospital, we need to shift them as soon as possible and take up for mechanical thrombectomy. The patient should be taken up for mechanical thrombectomy. So this is just an interactive video of how this works.
Mechanical thrombectomy is used when patients come in with typical stroke symptoms. Some of those strokes are caused by blood clots in smaller blood vessels, and some of them are caused by blood clots in larger blood vessels. And if the blood vessels that are affected are larger in size, meaning a couple of millimeters in diameter, then these patients may qualify for mechanical thrombectomy. It's minimally invasive. Endovascular procedure, which means that we go through the groin blood vessels and then advance small catheters all the way up to the neck vessels, eventually to the brain. Through those catheters, we can use several different types of devices to remove blood clots from the brain, basically pulling blood clots out of the brain with the help of our catheters and endovascular tools. Recovery is not really dependent on the procedure itself. Once we remove our catheters, the hole seals up within a few hours. Depends on how severe the stroke symptoms were or how severe the stroke.
Shashank, there is no sound.
Oh,
If the procedure goes well and there's no significant brain damage.
was that not audible?
You can start speaking.
Yeah. So this is basically the procedure for mechanical thrombectomy. Yeah. So mechanical thrombectomy is with am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yeah. Thank you. So the criteria for mechanical thrombectomy with a stent retriever or is that obviously the patient should not have a significant morbidity beforehand. That is the MRS modified Rankin scale 0 to 1. The occlusion, as we discussed, was in the internal carotid artery or the middle cerebral artery. That is the first segment or the M1 segment. The aspect score should be greater than 6, because if the aspect score is less than 6, it signifies that a significant amount of tissue is already infected, and we may not really be doing, we may not be giving the patient any benefit even after doing the procedure. Treatment should be initiated within 6 hours, but it can be increased up to 24 hours. So there may be two types: one with a stent retriever, where which was shown in the previous video. We go in with a stent retriever, remove the clot. The other one is we aspirate the clot. So within 6 hours, now there is evidence for a distal occlusion, that is the M2, M3 segment, that is distal arteries also can be done. Vertebral arteries, basilar artery, or the ACA. So aspects should be less than 6. Few conditions in which it is recommended till 24 hours, where there are two trials which were done, the diffuse and dawn trial, where if we see that the imaging is bad but the patient is still good, that means the patient is surviving on collateral circulation, and we need to act. So there may be an extended window period for such patients. So that obviously it requires the help of advanced imaging techniques like CT perfusion and MRI perfusion to identify these patients, and these patients can be treated till 24 hours. The technique involves the use of a stent retriever or a aspiration thrombectomy device. Once the thrombectomy is done, what we see is seen as there's a scale called as TICI. So TICI 3 being the perfect score, where all the vessels are visible, and TICI 1 being a very bad score. So we need to achieve a TICI 2B or 3. So TICI stands for thrombolysis in cerebral infarction. So the treatment of tandem, that is 2 lesions, also can be done. That is a proximal lesion as well as a distal lesion. Other techniques can be tried, like it was previously used, that is intra-arterial. Once you go inside the artery, you then inject the alteplase. However, that is not followed anymore. It can be used in few cases where there are very few indications actually where this is still being done. Now coming to the therapy of patients, which is primarily aimed at prevention of recurrent strokes. The most important part of that is antiplatelet therapy. So aspiration within 22 4 to 48 hours, 150 to 300 milligram is the dose recommended. If patient has been given IV thrombolysis, we defer antiplatelet therapy for more than 24 hours. After 24 hours, we can give. In patients with minor non-cardioembolic stroke and TIA, where the score ABCD2 score is one of the scores which helps to guide TIAs. So treatment with dual antiplatelets is started within 24 hours and continued up till 21 days. So effectively, in all ischemic stroke, we need to start dual antiplatelets for 21 days. If we are suspecting a large vessel occlusion and patient has not been able to get therapy, we need to continue the antiplatelets for 90 days. This can be followed by a single antiplatelet. So what are the antiplatelets which are used? The most common which we use is aspirin, dose of 150 to 300 milligram, then clopidogrel, which is 75 milligram. Other drugs have been tried, tirofiban, eptifibatide. Tirofiban is mostly used in the cath lab where we need to open the occluded vessels fast. Abciximab can be used. Ticagrelor is commonly accepted nowadays. It is known as Brilinta, which we give as a 90 milligram BD dose. However, it's very potent and we need to be mindful of hemorrhages which can be caused. So when do we use anticoagulant in stroke? So essentially, there are only 4 scenarios where we need to use heparin in treating strokes which are out of the window period. First, we have a documented cardioembolic stroke, that is a clot, LV thrombus, or an atrial fibrillation. Or if there is a known hypercoagulability disorder, protein C deficiency, protein S deficiency, or an APLA or something like that, as you said, patient of atrial fibrillation. And if there is a suspected floating thrombus, which is visualized within the vessels, then we can give a short period of anticoagulation followed by antiplatelets. So neuroprotective agents are not recommended for strokes. Hemodilution by volume expansion, vasodilatory agents, etc. are not recommended. General supportive care, this is very important in the rehabilitation part of the patient because we need to get them up and about as quickly as possible. Many of them are not able to swallow. So dysphagia screening can be done before the patient start taking orally. So what we can do is ask them, put a smiley ball or the soft ball below the neck and ask them to keep flexing the neck because exercise of the neck vessels also help to improve swallowing. For patients with dysphagia, it is reasonable to use a NG tube or a Ryle's tube for the first 7 days because we don't want these patients to aspirate. So prophylactic antibiotics have not been shown useful. However, if there is any suspicion of aspiration pneumonia, we need to treat with antibiotics. Intermittent pneumatic compression devices can be used to prevent DVT in immobilized patients because these patients may not be able to get up at all. Usually we can give low molecular weight heparin at a low dose, 0.4 ml subcutaneously OD for as a prophylactic dose of heparin. Blood glucose should be maintained between 140 to 180 to prevent hypo or hyperglycemia. Hypotension and hypovolemia should be corrected to maintain systemic perfusion levels. Early treatment of hypertension is required when there are comorbid conditions. So in the acute window period, we should be treating a high BP for ischemic stroke only when it is above 120 by 220 by 120. So at this time, it is reasonable to lower blood pressure. Below this, any kind of BP should not be meddled with. If we are instituting IV altiplase, then as discussed previously, we need to get down the BP below 185 by 105 millimeter of mercury. Otherwise, what happens in an acute ischemic event is the BP, there is cerebral autoregulation because of which the BP goes up. So in the acute phase, we don't need to treat the BP. We only treat the BP once we are past the 24-hour period. And most of the situations, we see that the BP comes down automatically. We only treat the BP if the BP is above 220 by 120. So then large strokes, we may be having brain edema. That is, there may be edema which is caused within the infarcted tissue. We can use osmotic therapy. Mannitol works, 3% saline as well. We can use moderate hyperventilation to bridge to more effective therapy. You can't, there is no use of hypothermia or barbiturated coma, and we should not give corticosteroids. So if there's a large stroke, usually we see that after day 3 or day 4, the patients tend to have severe edema because of which there may be a decline in neurological function. So decrease in level of consciousness is very important to use as a selection criteria for patients who require decompressive craniotomy. So this is basically they remove the the neurosurgeons to remove the flap of the brain to prevent the edema which occurs. It is especially seen that unilateral MCA infarction may deteriorate within 48 hours despite medical therapy. So craniotomy should be done with dural expansion to give it space. Especially this decision can be taken on early on if we are seeing that the infarct is quite huge. So we can do a prophylactic decompression so that the patient neurological dysfunction, neurological status need not decline. We don't need to wait for that. We can do it prophylactically as well. So ventriculostomy recommended for obstructive hydrocephalus in cerebellar infarction. We put in a drain to decrease the pressure. We can do a suboccipital craniotomy as well. If there are seizures to be treated as we treat seizures regularly with anti-epileptic drugs. We should see the patient characteristics. It's a focal seizure, then probably we go on with carbamazepine or oxcarbamazepine. Generalized seizure, we can treat with levetiracetam, phenytoin. Prophylactic use is not recommended. So if the patient has no seizure, no need to start on any anti-epileptic drugs. Now coming to the use of antithrombotic agents where antiplatelets are recommended over anticoagulants. So usually the thing is you give it for 21 days. You give dual antiplatelets for 21 days followed by single antiplatelets, and sometimes it may be increased up till 90 days when you are suspecting a large vessel occlusion. As in routine cases, warfarin is or heparin is not recommended. If there is a dissection is basically a flap within a vessel. So if that is documented, usually occurs in the cervical artery, the carotid artery, or the vertebral artery. So if there's a documented dissection, we can give antiplatelets or anticoagulant for 3 to 6 months. So these are special situations when there is a hemorrhagic infarction along with an acute ischemic stroke. We need to continue antiplatelets. Obviously, we need to see what the size of the infarct is. Our therapeutic decision making is guided by something called as the Diner's law, where we see the size of the infarct and decide when to start anticoagulation or antiplatelet therapy. Maybe a large infarct, we can wait up till 7 to 14 days to start anticoagulation. A minor infarct, we can start on the same day. For non-disabling statement, if there is carotid stenosis, we go for carotid revascularization. That can be done by a surgical method, that is carotid endarterectomy, or via the minimal invasive, that is via endovascular methods, that is carotid artery stenting. And again, the decision for carotid artery stenting or endarterectomy is based on the size of the infarct. Starting of oral anticoagulation between 4 to 14 days for atrial fibrillation is reasonable. Again, that is guided by the size of the infarct. Now coming to the lipid status, as we see, hyperlipidemia is one of the factors which cause strokes, which can promote atherosclerosis. So we need to measure fasting or non-fasting lipid profile in estimating atherosclerotic level and documented LDL level. So the aim of our therapy should be an LDL below 70 milligram per deciliter. So the magic number here is 70. We need to get our LDLs below 70. So we can start with any statin, that is rosuvastatin, atorvastatin, and we need to get the LDL below 70. So statin therapy to be continued on an indefinite basis. In some cases of embolic strokes, we may need, especially artery to artery embolisms, we may need to give statin therapy for a longer period at a higher dose, that is 80 milligrams. Women in childbearing age should explain to stop it 1 to 2 months prior to conception. Sorry. Patients with advanced kidney disease on maintenance hemodialysis may be continued on statin therapy, but they should not be initiated because that may lead to rhabdomyolysis. Now coming to hemorrhagic stroke, I'll keep this discussion brief. It is basically, as we said, because of increased blood pressure, and there may be a rupture in the blood vessel, especially if the patient is taking an anticoagulant or antiplatelet medication. If there is a hemorrhagic stroke, we need to go in with a decompressive craniotomy. If there is a subarachnoid hemorrhage, the ideal thing is to do a digital subtraction angiogram or a DSA to identify if there's an aneurysm. An aneurysm can be treated by clipping or coiling. Surgery embolization may also be done to remove arteriovenous malformations. So these are more prone to rupture, and they should be treated as fast as possible. With regards to the rehabilitation, speech therapy is a very important part of rehabilitation. We should be able to explain to them what the problem is and guide some. There may be a few techniques to help improve speech. The easiest thing is ask them to listen to music or ask them to listen to this. Especially helps them to understand, especially those patients with Wernicke's aphasia, which patients may be having difficulty in understanding what is being spoken. Music therapy can help them understand better. And the other thing is for the motor aphasia, where patient is not able to speak, we can ask them to communicate via gestures, or more effective is ask them to sing out. So once they sing, they are able to speak better. So this is what is called as melodic intonation therapy. Physical therapy, that is, they need to do proper exercises in the affected limb to regain movements as fast as possible and to prevent spasticity. Coming to the most important part, we should not let strokes occur. We should prevent them as much as possible. How are these possible? It is by eating a healthy diet, maintaining good weight, exercising regularly. So the recommended period for exercise is 150 minutes. That is 30 minutes a day for at least 5 days in a week. Absolutely avoiding smoking, avoiding alcohol, or at most moderate consumption. we keep the BP and the blood sugars in check. And if the patient has history of obstructive sleep apnea, we need to get that treated because that may lead to recurrent strokes. So there's some useful tips to give to our patients where these are the foods which are thought to help prevent strokes. You have your oats, almonds, soy, strawberry, low-fat milk, blackberries, banana, barley, cornmeal, and fish, salmon. So a few cases where we have treated patients. So this patient was a 45-year-old male. He presented to the hospital at 9 a.m. with right-sided weakness. MRI was done after 3.5 hours. I mean, the patient was born in 3.5 hours. MRI was done immediately. BP was 180 by 110. The sugar level was 133. Patient had an NIH score of 10, which was not very mild. So he had moderate. So this is the scoring which was adopted. Moderate dysarthria 2, right facial palsy 3, limb drift with ataxia 4, and right lower limb 2. So as we can see, this is the diffusion where we can see the hyperintense signal in the internal capsule as well as a little bit in the lentiform nucleus, and the same thing is showing low values on ADC. So this part of the corona radiator is also looking ischemic. So the plan was to give Altiplase 0.9 milligram per kg, which was started at 5 hours from the onset. It was actually given at 4.5 hours only. So 10% was given as a bolus and the rest over 1 hour. It was taken to a cath lab to see if there was a large vessel occlusion, but then it showed good recanalization after IV Altiplase. So at 24 hours, there was no bleed. Antiplatelet started. The NIHS had improved at 24 hours. It was 4, and on discharge, it came down to 2. When the patient was followed up after 3 months, the NIHS had come down to 0, and the repeat CT brain was almost normal. Second thing was a 56-year-old female, known hypertensive and diabetes mellitus, onset at 9:30, came in at 4 hours. NIH is 14. BP was 230 by 130. Had to be treated with labetalol to bring it down. The CT was fairly okay. The large vessel also seemed okay. The IV thrombolysis at again 4.5 hours with Altiplase 50 milligram. After 24 hours, there was no deficit which was seen on the CT. The 24-hour NIHS had come down to 2. Discharge NIHS was 0. That is, patient had completely recovered. Antiplatelets had been was started after 24 hours after CT brain. High homocysteine was there, which was being. Coming to the last part, that is stroke in COVID times. As we are seeing in COVID, the number of strokes have seem to have gone up. There may be a tendency for COVID patients to have hypercoagulability, because of which there may be a tendency to form clots, and they may be manifesting as strokes. So we need to institute proper therapy. So this chart is a slightly busy chart. It's taken up from the Indian Academy of Neurology, which has given guidelines to treat patients of COVID and stroke. So just to summarize, the main thing is to divide patients who are having suspicious symptoms of COVID and those which are not COVID. Do a rapid antigen test as fast as possible. The patients who are having COVID-19 and stroke, the same treatment needs to be instituted. That is, if they come in within the window period, we need to give them IV Altiplase and SOS if required. If there's a large vessel occlusion, take them for mechanical thrombectomy. But however, they need to be treated in a COVID designated center, and those that center should be treating only COVID patients, while the non-COVID patients can be treated as required. A useful thing where in COVID times is when you do the CT of the brain, you do a CT of the chest as well. I mean, you just go lower down and take a CT of the chest. So this will help to rapidly identify patients of COVID, because we may find the patient may be having CT findings of COVID, and that can help to segregate the patients and help to speed in therapy. So the guidelines remain the same, whether be it COVID or non-COVID. But with COVID, as we know later, there may be a tendency to form clots, so they are started on anticoagulant, and we have to be mindful. Just the recent papers which are coming on are of patients of COVID as they are on steroids, they may be prone to fungal infections like mucormycosis and all this. Those conditions, mucormycosis, also may lead to carotid artery occlusions and cause strokes. So we need to be careful in giving our patients steroids and identify mucormycosis as quickly as possible and treat them with amphotericin. So these are my references. Thank you all for patient listening. We are treating these conditions at Das Hospital. I would thank you all for for listening patiently, and I'll be free to take up questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Prashant. So thank you, Shashank, for your wonderful presentation and in-depth explanation. Now we'll just open up the session for a question answer. I'm first taking in Aditya, a dear psychiatrist, who would like to ask a question. Aditya, I'm just unmuting yourself, or you can unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Those who want to
So,
ask a question, you can raise your hand.
Thanks, Dr. Shashank, for excellent presentation. One thing I would like to point out is that I have myself in my clinical practice on more than a few occasions seen acute abnormal behavior, acute change in behavior. And most of the times it is presents as pure behavioral change or psychiatric symptoms with an acute onset. These patients are worthwhile to investigate for stroke because it is not uncommon for TIA patients and both stroke patients to present purely with psychiatric symptoms, especially if there has also psychiatric patients who have been on long-term antipsychotic treatment also tend to be higher for experiencing stroke. And rates of anxiety and depression post-stroke are always very high. And a lot of patients require some amount of psychiatric rehabilitation also along with medication. This is something I have seen. And one thing I wanted to ask is post-COVID, are you seeing an increase in microcoagulopathies, especially in COVID patients, especially in the elderly?
Thank you, Dr. Nair, for your excellent observations and question. Coming to the first part, any sudden onset change should be thought of being from a vascular etiology and needs to be investigated. As you said, there may be some patients who may be suddenly showing altered behavior. Some people tend to forget things for a brief amount of time. So these patients are what we term as a transient global amnesia. So as of now, there is no documented relation with stroke for transient global amnesia, but one of the etiologies is thought to be a vascular one, and we definitely need to investigate these patients. And the other thing which we need to make sure, obviously, is that, as you excellently pointed out, is many patients suffer from depression after stroke. So that is an important part of management where we need to give them probably SSRIs or something to, especially those strokes, the left hemispheric strokes, they are prone to much more depression because of the weakness, because they are aware of the weakness. The right-sided hemispheric strokes may have more of neglect, so they do not actually bother about the weakness, so they become more apathetic. So definitely it does require a multi-speciality team involving a neuropsychiatrist, a neurologist, which where we need to identify these syndromes and give them specific therapies. With regard to your second question, yes, definitely the micro thrombi and microemboli can be seen in COVID. So these may present with multiple infarcts. The typically described thing of the stroke imaging presentation with in COVID times is the triple vessel sign, where we are not seeing one territory affected by stroke, we are seeing 2, 3. So there may be patchy involvement in 2, 3 areas. So which is not respecting one arterial territory. So this again may point towards a microthrombi situation, which is probably embolizing and causing strokes in multiple territories.
Thank you very much for your question, Aditya, and also well answered. I'd like to request Dr. Nand Kishore Vig to unmute yourself and ask your question. I think you want to ask a question.
Sir, very elaborate presentation was there.
Thank
But I would like to ask you, which are the infarct where you will be very careful, they might get converted into hemorrhagic infarct. Is there some clinical differentiation also, or only you go by radiological presentation? Second is, when you speak about CVA, there are a lot of chronic. We have morbidity load of people who undergo chronic vascular dementia. Now, as a stroke management, you should also speak about those people. How to go about how to approach these people. Third thing is, in COVID, we are giving preventive anticoagulants. So can you tell one contraindication in your sphere which we should follow? Because see, there may be a hemorrhagic infarct in the past. So what is the cutoff period? Please tell me.
Thank you, Dr. Nandkishore. This is a very nice question. Very nice questions. So I think I would take them one by one. The first one is which strokes should we not lyse, or which strokes are big enough not to lyse, if I understand correctly. Yeah. So basically, when we are seeing a large stroke, if they are coming within the window period, that is within 4.5 hours, we should what we need to look is at the CT scan. Clinically, however big the stroke is, if the CT scan is showing a hypodensity more than 1/3 of the territory, definitely that is a sign that this patient could there could be hemorrhagic transformation. The other thing to note here is, if we are seeing a large stroke with the NIHs about 24-25, or even above, I mean 24-25 is too much, even above 12-14, if we are seeing a large stroke, what we need to realize is that this patient may not recover completely with IV alteplase. We need to give mechanical thrombectomy. So this is a whole new area where multiple trials are being conducted, where such patients need to be directly taken up to the cath lab and try to avoid. There are 3-4 trials which have come in very recently, as recent as 2 months back, which are showing that that we can take such patients directly to the cath lab. There's no need of giving IV alteplase, because as you said, IV alteplase may result in hemorrhage. But if the CT is normal, even after a large stroke, that is showing a imaging clinical dissociation. So that shows that this patient has a salvageable penumbra, and we need to act as quickly as possible. Yeah. The other question I think was regarding COVID, that how long to continue anticoagulant. So in patients of stroke, if a patient has already had a stroke and is having large infarcts, and so what we follow is something called as as I briefly mentioned, a Diner's law. So again, that divides again, that is based on the imaging. That is, we need to see whether the CT scan is showing 1/4, 1/4 to 1/3, or above 1/3. So if the CT scan is not showing, or a very small infarct, we can give anticoagulant straight away. If the if the infarct is less than 1/4, then we can wait up to 3 days. If the infarct is between 1/4 to 1/3 territory, then we need to give for 7 days. We need to wait for 7 days before administering anticoagulation. And if it is more than if there's a huge territory that is more than 1/3 territory is involved, then we might need to wait as much as 7 to 14 days before starting anticoagulation.
Sorry, my query was, if a patient who has got COVID, now if he is admitted, we are giving preventive anticoagulation. Now, is there a past history of hemorrhagic infarct? So what is the cutoff? So these patients we have to be very carefully give, because we are giving now blindly to anyone who is admitted in the hospital. So what is the cutoff period where you will not give this preventive kind of a thing? Unless, D dimer is 5,000, 6,000, you will have to give. But if somebody who's got hemorrhagic infarct, for D dimer of 500 or 800, you will not give. So which are those people? Is there a cutoff period?
Yeah. So if within the past 3 months, if the patient has suffered a hemorrhage, then that is a complete contraindication. We can't give anticoagulation for that. So if it has been like 3 to 6 months, again we need to assess the risk benefit ratio. 3 to 9 months risk benefit ratio. Usually, if the hemorrhage or something has occurred beyond 9 months, it converts into a gliotic area. So then again, if the patient is having severe COVID, we can go ahead with the anticoagulant therapy.
Chronic hypoxia, see, another point of investigation, how frequently, there is a phenomenon called transient atrial fibrillation. See, a patient may not present on the table with atrial fibrillation,
Right.
but a small, embolic episode. So how frequently you send these patients for their 24-hour Holter, and how frequently you check this ambulatory BP monitoring? Because at the time of stroke, the pressure already might have come down with bleed, So how frequently you use these modalities of investigation?
That's again an excellent question. So with regards to transient AF, we have noticed that those are the ones which actually result in stroke. So all these come under what was the previously known category as cryptogenic stroke. So what has happened is once you see a patient, if the patient, the clues for probably a cardiac origin of a stroke is if there are more than one territory involved. Now in such patients, if we are seeing that the patient has absolute normal vasculature, that is the extracranial vasculature as well as the intracranial vasculature, but yet the patient is having strokes or multiple strokes, then we need to search for a cardiac cause. Now, within the cardiac cause, we go in for a 2D echo. If the 2D echo is not showing any, if there's no LV thrombus or an obvious cause of embolism, then definitely we need to go for we look at the ECG, and definitely we go in for a monitoring. So initially, you go in for a 24-hour Holter monitoring, but many times the 24-hour Holter also does not pick up anything. Then you need to and suppose the patient is having recurrent strokes, then we need to consider this seriously. We need to chase this. So there may be so we may need to chase it for as much as 3 months. So what we have is something called as a loop recorder. So it could be an external or an internal loop recorder. So this keeps the data of the ECG for a longer period of time. So again, what the cutoff which studies say is a 1 month loop recording. If it shows more than 24-hour load of atrial fibrillation, that would be an indication to start anticoagulation. So that is a very specific thing. But again, but definitely, if patient is having recurring stroke, we need to chase this because, as you said, the cardioembolic source looks likely. The other thing with cardioembolic strokes is we see that many patients may have something called as a patent foramen ovale. So what happens is there is a shunting of blood from the venous side to the arterial side, and because of that, there may be emboli which are going in from the legs and elsewhere into the arterial circulation. So we need to be mindful of that. So that will require many times may not be picked up on a transthoracic echo. We need to go in with a transesophageal echo to look at that patent foramen ovale, and if that is demonstrating if that is demonstrated and that is proven to be the cause of the stroke, then we may need to close that.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. What
Thank
are
you.
the approaches towards young strokes, basically? Because that forms, that itself is a different category. So are there special investigation what you recommend for young stroke?
Yes, sir. That's again a very nice topic. Thank you for the question. So young stroke is a totally different entity. What we traditionally classify is as young is below 40. So there are multiple reasons why we see young strokes. So as of now, the treatment is the same. That is, you start with aspirin and with atorvastatin. But the causes to be evaluated apart from the traditional, see, what we need to realize is even if it is young, nowadays so many people are having diabetes, hypertension. We have to effectively rule them out because those are still very common. After ruling them out, we need to go in for other causes like autoimmune. So autoimmune causes, it will probably we need to send in your ANA, that is the anti-nuclear antibodies, ANA blood to see any one. Then the other things which I would recommend is ESR, CRP. If it's elevated, it shows that there's an inflammatory phenomena going on. Then we need to go in with an APLA, that is the anti-plasma phospholipid antigen, APLA test. Then we may need to do a C-ANCA and a P-ANCA test, again, which shows evidence of vasculitis. So all these APLA being a vasculitic phenomena as well as a thrombotic phenomena. And rarely we need to look at blood disorders. So in the category of blood disorders, first we need to rule out sickle cell, which is very common. Apart from that, we need to look at other conditions like known
Homocystinemia.
homocystinemia, exactly, homocystinemia, known hypercoagulabilities like protein C deficiency, protein S
Protein C,
deficiency,
yeah.
yeah, and antithrombin 3 deficiency, and all these things come up. These are especially useful
Thanks.
when
Thanks.
in young stroke. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, sir.
Thank you, Nand Kishore Vik, for your lovely questions as usual. They're always something wonderful. Any questions anyone wants to ask, please raise your hand with the icon on the reaction. Then we can ask you. If there are no questions, I have a question. I am in an August gathering of brilliant physicians, not qualified as brilliant surgeons. I have a question. You said pizzas cause more problem with strokes. Am I right, Shashank?
Not all pizzas.
So if it is pizza, then does Italy have a higher incidence of CVAs? Is there any study done? Like there was a study done regarding problem of cardiovascular cardiac events more in the British than in the French, and they found that they had three things good. They had the red wine, they had the fish, and they had the exercise in the form of sex. So the French had less cardiac events than the British. Is there any study done in which you find that Sicilians and the Italians who have got more consumption of pizza, do they have more incidence of strokes? So if that is not a case, then we should not blame the pizza.
So thank you, sir, for the question. I mean, first of all, I would not be aware of any such study, which is typically this one. To come to think of it, it is the etiology is much more multifactorial. It cannot be attributed to one thing. See, if you are having your pizzas but still exercising well, it still leads to a better metabolic profile. So you may still be less prone to strokes or other cardiovascular events. So what we need to remember is your output should be greater than your input. So that will help to prevent any kind of vascular events.
Thank you very much. If there are no questions, if there
I have one doubt. We had a patient who had taken Covishield, and after 48 hours, he presented with the CVA. Now, this patient was potential candidate for CVA, no doubt about it. But how to approach such kind of patients? Have you had any experience of such exposures?
Thank you.
Because
Dr.
there you have to see factor 4 antibody and all those things. So have you had any experience?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Vik, for your question. Personally, I have not come across patients who have developed this one. But as you said, that's a very good topic altogether. The recent NEJM paper, which is showing the role of PPF4 antibody, where they documented 5 patients who had the antibody and they were prone to thrombotic complications after Covishield vaccine. With regard to that, the ideal approach to such patients would be to thoroughly investigate them, identify the antibody, and the treatment is more towards giving immunotherapy to reduce the antibodies. So that could be in the form of steroids and higher immunosuppression. And the other thing to look at is if you want to prevent coagulation, we need to go ahead with direct thrombin inhibitors like dabigatran and all these things. So heparin obviously will not work, and that may be problems with that. But this is the I've just heard of case reports from India. I'm not sure that there is a causative etiology has been confirmed that it is the after taking the vaccine only he's developed. It could be because so many people are receiving the vaccine. It could just be a coincidental thing. But obviously, definitely, this area merits research. We need to find out exactly which patients, and we need to try to prevent strokes in them. I mean,
Thank you.
that's
Dr. Frank,
Last,
anything
my
else?
last thing, only one last thing.
Yeah.
What you spoke about dual antiplatelet therapy for 3 months. After 3 months, you convert into single antiplatelet. A large number of patients are not able to digest a heavy dose of aspirin. So aspirin vis-a-vis clopidogrel or ticagrelor, are they having same effect, or still ecosprin is scoring over those?
so the main benefit of ecosprin is thank you for the question once again. So the main benefit of ecosprin is that it is time tested, that it has been used for such a long time that we know all the effects, we know all the side effects. So and definitely it has a good efficacy. So that is the go-to antiplatelet for any physician. The thing about other antiplatelets is clopidogrel. Again, the body of evidence is huge. We have used clopidogrel; they are effective. And what we have heard about aspirin resistance or clopidogrel resistance, I mean, most of it can still be attributed to patient non-compliance rather than the drug itself not working. So effectively, these two should work. We have used ticagrelor in a fair number of patients, but the uh, personally, I have encountered with ticagrelor, especially patients who have bigger infarcts, they tend to bleed. So, I mean, it's more potent as compared to these two. So, again, we need to see what we are, if we are going in for an intervention for a stent, maybe ticagrelor is the way to go because we need a strong anticoagulant,
I want to know. I want to know after 90 days.
after 90 days,
After
aspirin,
90 days,
aspirin, aspirin.
see, aspirin. A lot of people are developing. They may develop bleed or gastric gastritis or even frank ulcer. So in that case, are in comparison,
Yeah.
they are both having same effect, or still ecosprin, given the situation, after tiding over, can we should stick to that gold standard drug?
Yeah, thanks. So when aspirin is patient is having problems with aspirin, definitely it warrants a switchover. That is, we shift to clopidogrel, which is the next best, because that may not lead to the side effects. We need to monitor it. As I said, with ticagrelor, it may be a bit more potent. So what we need to do is first, if there is plain aspirin, we need to shift to an enteric-coated aspirin, that is Aspizol, or the newer things are coming on. So that may have some benefit. Give it with potent PPIs, that is either give rabeprazole, esomeprazole, or whatever. And if still the patient is having problem, the ideal way to go over to the shift, that is you shift to clopidogrel.
Yes, Dr. Rekha Bhatkande, you can ask your question.
Okay. Shashank, thank you so much. Even a gastroenterologist like me was thoroughly impressed and learned a lot of neurology.
Thank you.
You said that the 0R that we're looking at is really to try and minimize the brain cell damage that occurs, right? So what about all these neuroprotective drugs, like nirentratide and, things that have come out, which is supposed to protect the brain cells and give you a better chance to go ahead and do your mechanical thrombectomy and things like that?
Thank you, madam, for your question. With regards to neuroprotective agents, there are few which have been used previously, like citicoline and piracetam, which may not be really useful. I mean, it is not ideally recommended. As you rightly mentioned, lenalidomide and the NA1. So these are newer agents which have yet to be proven. I mean, they definitely could be useful, but the studies are right now being conducted, and I think we should have the results in probably 1 year or 1 to 2 years. So that they are doing this. They are doing a study with that alone, and along with that, they couple it with mechanical thrombectomy and all these things. So I think this warrants more data before we can regularly start using in our patients.
Thank you, Shashank.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Rekha Bhatkande. I request Dr. N.C. Khetani to ask his questions, please. Dr. N.C. Khetani, unmute yourself and ask the question. Dr.
No,
Khetani.
this is regarding that Covishield vaccine, in Germany and other Western countries, they have banned giving Covishield vaccine below the age of 60 because of increased incidence of thrombosis. So, what is the incidence of this stroke or something, and what is the cause of this thing? You have partly answered the question, but what is the incidence of this? Because
Thank you, Doc.
because Western countries have banned the Covishield below the age of 60.
Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Khetani, for your question. I think we have some idea of the etiology with the paper which came up, antiplatelet 4. But I think again, data from India is lacking. I mean, we need more data before conclusively answering these questions, because what we to apply to such a large scale population like our country, there has to be some strong data, which I mean, 1 or 2 case reports definitely we may be hearing of, but that is not enough to stop people from telling people to stop receiving the vaccine. We need some conclusive body of evidence before we can start recommendations. I personally have not come across any stroke post Covishield.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Khetani. Request Dr. Kumaraswamy to ask his question. Dr. Kumaraswamy.
Thank you, Dr. Das. Thank you, Shashank, for a wonderful presentation. My question is related to dental interventions in a stroke patient, especially if it is going to be a hemorrhagic condition or a bleeding intervention like extraction or any minor surgery. How long do we wait after the stroke patient has been treated by the physician before we can intervene?
Thank you for the excellent question, Dr. Kumaraswamy. So the ideal for any procedure after a stroke, the ideal recommended time is 9 months. That is, we need to defer the procedure for 9 months. However, if the procedure is like very urgent and it has to be done, it can be taken up probably after 4 to 5 months, after explaining the due risk to the patient, and we need to weigh the benefits and the risks before taking up the procedure, and we need to explain it to the patient as well.
The reason I ask this, Dr. Shashank, is if there is a mobile tooth, and we know that post-stroke, these conditions can exaggerate because the speech is affected. And if there is an underlying dental condition which is making it worse, it probably makes sense for us to at least address that immediate need. Can we, in that case, intervene earlier?
So if there is no risk of infection, if there is no risk of probably conversion into a larger abscess which may affect the systemic circulation, I think it would be prudent to wait for a period of 9 months before conducting any procedure, because that would involve stopping the antiplatelets as well, which is again risky.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Any other questions? Shashank, thank you very much for your lovely presentation.
Yeah, I just want to mention, thank you, Dr. Das, for giving me the opportunity to speak on this topic.
We are welcome, but you deserve it because you have done a lovely presentation and justification to the topic. So we end our first CME. We had about 35 people who attended. This is our first CME. We will reach to more people, and our endeavor is to have people who are experts in their field to talk. They need not be from our hospital. They can be from anywhere in the city of Mumbai or anywhere in India or the world. We will have the next program on 20th of this month, that is May. And this program will be held from 9 to 10:30 p.m. Sorry, not 9:30 a.m. That should read p.m. So we'll have this program from 9 p.m. to, just a minute, 9 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. Today we have exceeded our time because we started a little late. Next time we'll start at 9 sharp. And if you want to know more about our hospital, this is the website, www.dashospital.com. You can find all the inquiries. We are also on Facebook as Dr. Das Hospital. So thank you very much, all of you, for your time that you have devoted in this program to make it a success. And there will be many more. The next program we start on, again, I am repeating, it is on 20th of May, which is a Thursday, and it is between 9 and 10:30 p.m. We have an account with Zoom, so there's no time restriction, but I'm sure everyone must be hungry or sleepy. So thank you very much and all the best. Shubh Ratri, Shabba Khair. Good night.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.